At 9:47 in the morning on June 6, 1944, Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, assigned to the 354th Fighter Squadron of the 4th Fighter Group, pushed the throttle of his P-51B Mustang, nicknamed Jerry, and soared from his English airfield. His destination was France, where he was to join the colossal aerial shield safeguarding Allied forces as they stormed the Normandy beaches. This olive drab camouflaged aircraft, powered by a 1,490 horsepower Packard-built Rolls Royce Merlin engine and armed with 4.50 caliber machine guns, represented the pinnacle of American long-range fighter technology, a machine Fraser expertly commanded. Yet, Fraser remained unaware that within hours, his state-of-the-art fighter would be grounded in German-occupied France, and in a matter of days, a German test pilot would be flying it over Germany. This unexpected flight would fundamentally alter the Luftwaffe's understanding of the formidable aircraft that was systematically dismantling their air superiority over Europe. The true impact of this captured machine, and the intelligence it yielded, would resonate throughout the final year of the war, forever changing the course of aerial combat. The initial challenge emerged at 12,000 feet above northern France. While Fraser's squadron provided cover for a bomber group, his engine began to falter, oil pressure plummeting and coolant temperature soaring. The Merlin engine, while the Mustang's primary strength, harbored a critical vulnerability: its intricate liquid cooling system. With radiators positioned beneath the fuselage and coolant lines weaving through the airframe, even a minuscule leak or a tiny perforation from flak or bullets could trigger rapid overheating, causing the engine to seize within minutes. Fraser had no alternative. He radioed his flight leader, broke formation, and began a descent. He desperately needed to locate a suitable landing spot before his engine completely failed. Below, the French countryside unfolded as a mosaic of fields and hedgerows, all within German territory, teeming with enemy soldiers. Fraser, however, had no choice. His engine was dying. He identified a field that appeared sufficiently level, extended his landing gear and flaps, and brought the Mustang down as gently as possible. It touched rough grass and glided to a halt. Remarkably, the aircraft was undamaged, no airframe integrity issues, no bent propellers, no broken landing gear, only a defunct engine. Fraser exited the cockpit, surveyed the deserted French landscape, and began to walk, hoping to evade capture. He didn't get far. German troops apprehended him within hours. The Mustang remained in that field for less than 6 hours before a German recovery team arrived. These specialized salvage units, known as Berge Batallione, operated with a highly efficient system, tasked with retrieving downed Allied aircraft before American and British fighters could strafe them into scrap. The team worked with urgency, draining residual fuel, disconnecting the battery, covering the cockpit, and establishing guards. By nightfall, a heavy flatbed truck was backing up to the Mustang. By dawn the following morning, Fraser's P-51B was loaded onto a train, heading east towards Germany, destined for Rechlin. Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary aircraft testing facility, was situated approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin in a secluded region of Mecklenburg. Since 1936, this complex had served as Germany's main center for aircraft evaluation. Every new German aircraft design underwent rigorous testing here, as did every captured enemy aircraft deemed flyable. The facility boasted multiple runways, hangars filled with experimental aircraft, workshops staffed by expert mechanics, and a cadre of test pilots who flew everything from gliders to the most advanced jet fighters. Among these elite pilots was 30-year-old Hans Werner Lerche, an engineer by training and one of Germany's finest aviators. Lerche had learned to fly gliders as a teenager, earned his powered aircraft license in the 1930s, and joined the Luftwaffe at the onset of the war. However, Lerche never flew combat missions. His extraordinary skill was deemed too valuable. He was assigned to Rechlin as a test pilot, his role being to fly any aircraft provided and generate meticulous reports on its performance. By June 1944, Lerche had piloted over 120 distinct aircraft types, encompassing German and Italian designs, as well as captured Soviet fighters and British bombers. He had test-flown Spitfires, Lancasters, P-38s, and P-47s. He possessed the unique ability to take off in an unfamiliar aircraft without a manual or checklist, relying solely on his engineering acumen and pilot instincts. Remarkably, he had never crashed a single aircraft in his entire career, an astonishing record considering he often flew enemy machines with no instruction, no training, just informed deductions about control placement and system operation. When Fraser's Mustang arrived at Rechlin on June 8, Lerche was instructed to prepare it for flight within 2 days. This was an exceptionally tight deadline. Typically, captured aircraft would sit for weeks while mechanics meticulously examined every system, checked for sabotage, repaired damage, and deciphered their operational intricacies. However, the Luftwaffe was desperate for information on the P-51. The Mustang had only appeared over Germany in significant numbers 6 months prior, in December 1943. Before its arrival, American bombers had been escorted by P-38s and P-47s, capable aircraft, but with limited range. Consequently, bombers were highly vulnerable deep within German airspace, where Luftwaffe fighters were decimating them by the dozens. Then, the Mustang emerged. Suddenly, American bombers possessed an escort that could accompany them anywhere, Berlin, Munich, even targets deep in Poland. The Mustang could cover over 900 miles on internal fuel, extending to 1,500 miles with external drop tanks. It was fast, reaching 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, and could climb to 42,000 feet. It could outturn a Messerschmitt Bf-109, dive away from a Focke-Wulf FW-190, and its 4.50 caliber machine guns could tear a German fighter apart. In a mere 6 months, the Mustang had irrevocably transformed the air war over Europe. German pilots who had commanded the skies in 1943 suddenly found themselves on the defensive, and kill ratios that had previously favored the Luftwaffe were now reversing. No one in German command fully grasped why this particular American fighter so dramatically surpassed all other Allied aircraft. This urgency explains why Lerche was given only 2 days to prepare Fraser's Mustang. They needed answers. The mechanics at Rechlin worked ceaselessly. They removed the engine, identified and repaired the coolant leak that had forced Fraser down, and meticulously inspected every system, control surface, fuel line, and hydraulic connection. To prevent accidental engagement by German anti-aircraft gunners, they painted the undersides and tail a bright yellow, the standard identification color for captured aircraft at Rechlin, and adorned the wings and fuselage with large black crosses. They assigned it the German designation code T9+HK and filled its tanks with high-octane American fuel from captured stocks. By the morning of June 10, the Mustang was ready. At 0800 hours, Lerche approached the aircraft. He had diligently reviewed every piece of intelligence the Luftwaffe possessed on the P-51, combat reports from pilots who had engaged them, technical drawings recovered from downed aircraft, and performance estimates derived from combat observations. Yet, all this was second-hand information. Lerche was about to acquire first-hand data. He was poised to discover whether the P-51 Mustang truly lived up to American claims or if it was merely another overrated fighter that appeared more impressive on paper than in the air. The pre-flight inspection lasted 20 minutes. The airframe appeared robust, with smooth skin, flush rivets, and clean lines. The wings were notably slender, far more so than those of a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or a Focke-Wulf FW-190, a testament to its laminar flow airfoil design, which reduced drag at high speeds, a clever piece of engineering. The cockpit offered more space compared to German fighters, and the canopy provided excellent visibility, though not quite matching the later bubble canopy models depicted in intelligence photographs. The controls seemed intuitive: stick, rudder pedals, throttle, mixture control, propeller pitch. The instrument panel was logically arranged, despite everything being in English and utilizing American units, airspeed in miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour, altitude in feet instead of meters. Lerche settled into the cockpit. The seat was a comfortable fit, the stick falling naturally to his hand. He checked the control surfaces, ailerons moved fluidly, the elevator responded correctly, and the rudder exhibited good travel. He located the fuel selector, gear lever, and flap control, then confirmed the gun switches were off. The last thing he needed was an accidental discharge of 4.50 caliber machine guns on the Rechlin ground. He scrutinized the engine instruments, oil pressure, oil temperature, coolant temperature, manifold pressure, tachometer, all the vital gauges American pilots relied upon to keep the Merlin engine operating. Lerche understood the Merlin was a high-performance engine, but also a sensitive one. Too much throttle too quickly and it would falter, too lean a mixture and it would overheat. German engines were more forgiving, the Daimler-Benz 605 and the Bf 109 could withstand abuse, and the BMW 801 in the FW 190 was virtually indestructible. The Merlin, however, was a thoroughbred, demanding careful handling. At 0842, Lerche signaled the ground crew. They removed the wheel chocks. Lerche engaged the starter, the Merlin turned over, caught, and settled into a smooth idle. He allowed it to warm, observing the oil temperature gradually rise. The engine's sound differed from German power plants, higher pitched, smoother. Once temperatures reached their normal range, Lerche tested the magnetos, both checking good. He advanced the throttle slightly, feeling the aircraft strain against the brakes, then released them and began taxiing. The Mustang's tailwheel was not steerable like some German aircraft, requiring differential braking and rudder input for ground control, a technique Lerche was familiar with from flying captured British aircraft. He taxied to the runway, performed a final check, and gazed down the long concrete strip, no wind, clear sky, perfect conditions for a test flight. He advanced the throttle smoothly, maintaining rudder pressure to keep the nose straight. The Merlin responded instantly. The Mustang accelerated rapidly, faster than a Bf 109, faster than most German fighters Lerche had ever flown. The tail lifted at 40 miles per hour. At 90 miles per hour, the aircraft smoothly became airborne. Gear up. The Mustang climbed away from Rechlin at a steep angle, the Merlin pulling powerfully at full throttle. Lerche leveled the Mustang at 5,000 feet and commenced his evaluation. The immediate impression was the extraordinary lightness of the controls. The stick demanded almost no force to move, even tiny inputs elicited an immediate response. The ailerons were incredibly effective. Lerche rolled the Mustang to the left, then to the right, the aircraft snapped through the rolls faster than any fighter he had ever piloted. In a Bf 109, one had to muscle the stick for a rapid roll rate, in the FW 190, controls became heavy at high speeds. But the Mustang rolled effortlessly, almost too easily. Lerche had to exercise caution to avoid over-controlling. He then checked the rudder, responsive, but not overly sensitive. The elevator was light yet effective. The Mustang exhibited excellent pitch stability, showing no tendency to nose over or climb independently. He attempted a loop, the aircraft executed it cleanly, with no hint of stalling or buffeting, just smooth acceleration throughout the maneuver. A barrel roll followed, perfectly executed. Next, a climbing turn, pulling 4 G-forces. The Mustang remained smooth, with no shaking or pre-stall warnings. Lerche advanced the throttle to full power and accelerated in level flight, 160 miles per hour, 200, 250, 300. The Mustang continued to accelerate, reaching 320 miles per hour. He leveled off, noting the Merlin's manifold pressure and RPM. The engine ran smoothly, temperatures normal. He had additional power available if needed. German intelligence had estimated the Mustang's top speed at 410 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Lerche intended to verify this himself. He climbed to 23,000 feet, leveled off, and pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power. The Mustang accelerated, 360 miles per hour, 380, 400, 410, then 416 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. The German estimates had been close, but slightly underestimated. The Mustang was even faster than intelligence had believed. Lerche reduced power and explored various configurations. Flaps down, gear down, simulating a landing approach. The Mustang decelerated smoothly, exhibiting no adverse characteristics. Gear up, flaps up, returning to high-speed flight. He then tested its stall characteristics. First, in a clean configuration, power off, nose up, gradually reducing speed. The Mustang provided ample warning before the stall, with controls becoming mushy and the aircraft beginning to buffet, before the nose gently dropped. There was no wing drop, no sudden snap roll, just a docile stall that was easy to recover from. He repeated the test in landing configuration, gear down, flaps down, power off. The result was identical, good warning, a gentle brake, and easy recovery. Finally, he tried it with power on, simulating a combat turn. At full throttle, the Mustang would indeed stall in a sharp turn if pulled too hard, but it provided clear warning through increasing stick force and buffet. Lerche noted that the P-51 was actually easier to fly near the stall than most German fighters. A Bf-109 would snap into a spin if stalled in a turn, and an FW-190 would violently drop a wing. The Mustang simply mushed, giving the pilot time to recognize the problem and recovering smoothly upon relaxing back pressure. This characteristic was critically important in combat. A fighter that could be flown aggressively without endangering the pilot was a truly lethal weapon. Lerche spent an hour subjecting the Mustang to every maneuver imaginable: vertical climbs, split SS, chandelles, Immelmann turns, scissors maneuvers. The aircraft responded instantly to every input, never doing anything unexpected, never trying to kill him. When he landed back at Rechlin at 10:15, the ground crew was waiting, eager for his assessment. Lerche shut down the Merlin, climbed out of the cockpit, and uttered 5 words that would appear in his official report the following day: "It is a truly unique aircraft." Over the next 2 days, Lerche flew Fraser's Mustang 4 more times. He tested its high-altitude performance, reaching 36,000 feet, and its dive performance, exceeding 450 miles per hour in a steep descent. He evaluated fuel consumption, endurance, engine handling, and control response at various speeds and altitudes. He then compared the Mustang's performance to the latest German fighters, the Bf-109G-10 and the FW-190D-9. His conclusion was unequivocal: only these 2 German aircraft could match the Mustang in combat, and even then, they were not clearly superior. The Mustang was fast at all altitudes, climbed effectively, turned tightly, dove like a rocket, and possessed sufficient fuel to sustain a fight for hours. Lerche also noted its weaknesses: the engine sensitivity to rough handling and fuel system instability if the internal fuselage tank was filled to certain levels. Additionally, the aircraft would stall at full throttle if pulled into too sharp a turn. However, these were minor issues compared to its overall performance. Lerche's report was typed, classified, and disseminated throughout Luftwaffe command. Copies reached fighter units defending Germany, training squadrons, and engineering teams. The report was detailed, technical, and brutally honest. It did not embellish the Mustang's performance or falsely claim German superiority for propaganda purposes. It simply stated the facts: the P-51 Mustang was an exceptional fighter aircraft. It boasted extraordinary range, high speed at all altitudes, excellent maneuverability, and effective armament. Crucially, it was being produced in immense quantities. The Americans could afford to lose Mustangs and replace them within weeks. Germany could not afford to lose experienced pilots. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was depleting its experienced pilots faster than training schools could produce replacements. Young pilots with as little as 50 hours of flight time were being thrust into combat against American pilots with 200 hours of training and 50 combat missions. The outcome was predictable: German pilots perished, and American pilots accumulated kills. One of the most striking illustrations of this shift occurred in March 1945. By this point, the war was nearing its end. Germany was being overwhelmed from the east by Soviet forces and from the west by American and British forces. The Luftwaffe was a mere shadow of its former strength. Most of its seasoned pilots were dead or captured, its aircraft largely destroyed on the ground by strafing attacks, and fuel so scarce that many remaining planes were grounded. In early March 1945, American intelligence officers began interrogating captured German pilots, seeking their opinions on American aircraft. 22 captured Luftwaffe pilots, many of them experienced aces, were interviewed. Their interrogations were compiled into a classified document titled Air Intelligence Weekly Summary, dated March 23, 1945. The section, Allied Fighters as Germans See Them, contained detailed opinions from men who had directly fought against P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s. The results were unambiguous. The captured German pilots universally rated the P-51 Mustang as the premier fighter in the American arsenal. They respected its speed, range, and agility. Some confessed they would only attempt to outrun it if they had a significant head start. Others stated that only the most skilled German pilots dared to engage a Mustang in a turning fight, as its agility was exceedingly difficult to counter. One experienced pilot was quoted as saying that the American .50 caliber machine guns were highly effective against fighters, particularly due to their high volume of fire and deadly accuracy. The Luftwaffe had spent 2 years developing tactics to defeat American bombers and fighters. Those tactics had proven effective against the P-38 and P-47. But they were far less effective against the Mustang. The Mustang was simply too fast, too maneuverable, and possessed too much endurance. By the time these interrogations were conducted, the outcome of the air war was no longer in doubt. The Luftwaffe had been defeated. Allied air forces completely controlled the skies over Germany. German pilots who managed to take off faced overwhelming odds, 5-1, 10-1, sometimes 20-1, and many of those Allied fighters were Mustangs. Hans Werner Lerche survived the war. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, he was captured by American forces. Recognizing his value as a test pilot and his profound knowledge of German aircraft development, they subjected him to extensive interrogation about the aircraft he had flown and the reports he had authored. The Americans were particularly interested in Lerche's assessment of their own aircraft, especially the P-51. Lerche told them the unvarnished truth: the Mustang was among the finest aircraft he had ever flown. It possessed a combination of speed, range, and maneuverability that few other fighters could match. It was well engineered, expertly built, and lethal in combat. The Americans meticulously documented his insights. After the war, Lerche returned to civilian life in Germany, working as an engineer and occasionally as a test pilot for German aviation companies. He later published a book titled Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II, based on his wartime logbooks, which contained detailed descriptions of every aircraft he had flown. The chapter on the P-51 Mustang was one of the longest. Lerche described Fraser's aircraft in detail, recounted the test flights at Rechlin, and offered his honest assessment of its performance. He never viewed the P-51 as an enemy aircraft. To Lerche, it was simply a superbly designed machine. As both an engineer and a pilot, he appreciated excellent design regardless of its country of origin. Lerche passed away in 1994 at approximately 80 years old. His book remains one of the most comprehensive accounts of Luftwaffe aircraft testing during World War II. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, the pilot who crash-landed that Mustang in northern France, spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner in Germany. Captured on June 6, 1944, the very day the Allies landed in Normandy, he was liberated in May 1945 by advancing American forces and returned to the United States that summer. He remained unaware of his aircraft's fate until years later when researchers, tracing German records, uncovered the story. Fraser learned that his P-51, the one he had named Jerry, had been tested by one of Germany's most skilled pilots, flown by the Rosarius traveling circus to multiple Luftwaffe bases, and used to instruct German pilots on how to combat Mustangs. The aircraft, designated T-9+HK, was ultimately lost on December 10, 1944. Fraser's service record simply noted one aircraft lost to mechanical failure over enemy territory on June 6, 1944. It did not mention that his aircraft became one of the most critical intelligence sources the Luftwaffe acquired regarding the P-51. The P-51 Mustang reshaped the air war over Europe in ways that transcended mere performance statistics. It wasn't just fast, or maneuverable, or long-ranged, it was all of these attributes synergistically combined in a single aircraft. Produced in massive quantities, over 15,000 Mustangs built during the war, it was reliable enough to penetrate deep into enemy territory and return home. It was versatile enough to escort bombers, strafe ground targets, and engage enemy fighters in dogfights. And it became available at precisely the moment the Allies needed it most. The Mustang's origins make its success even more extraordinary. North American Aviation designed and constructed the prototype in a mere 102 days in 1940. The British had initially approached the company, requesting they build P-40 Warhawks under license. Instead, James Kindleberger, president of North American Aviation, proposed developing an entirely new fighter from scratch, under the direction of chief designer Edgar Schmud. The British agreed. The first prototype, designated NA-73X, took its maiden flight on October 26, 1940, just 149 days after the contract was signed. This development timeline was unprecedented. Most fighter aircraft took years to design, test, and bring into production. North American accomplished it in less than 5 months. However, early Mustangs encountered a problem. They were powered by Allison engines that performed well at low altitude but lost significant power above 15,000 feet. The aircraft was fast at sea level, exceeding 400 miles per hour in some tests. But at 20,000 feet, where most combat over Europe occurred, the Allison-powered Mustang could barely reach 350 miles per hour, rendering it ineffective as a bomber escort. The Royal Air Force utilized early Mustangs for low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. American forces deployed Allison-powered Mustangs to North Africa and the China-Burma-India theater, where combat typically took place at lower altitudes. Then, in late 1942, an idea emerged that transformed everything. Ronald Harker, a test pilot at Rolls-Royce, suggested fitting a Mustang with a Merlin 61 engine. The Merlin, with its two-stage supercharger, maintained power at high altitude. Rolls-Royce installed Merlin engines in 5 test Mustangs, and the results were astonishing. The Merlin Mustang could achieve speeds over 430 miles per hour at 30,000 feet and climb to 40,000 feet. It retained all the range and low-drag characteristics of the original design, but now possessed high-altitude performance that matched or surpassed any fighter globally. An American military attaché in London, Thomas Hitchcock, witnessed the tests, acquired the results, and immediately dispatched a report to Washington. Hitchcock, a World War I fighter pilot who had been shot down and captured by the Germans before escaping a POW camp, and who became one of America's most celebrated polo players after the war, understood both aviation and the intricacies of military bureaucracy. His report on the Merlin Mustang emphasized that this was the long-range escort fighter America urgently needed for its bombing campaign against Germany. The Army Air Forces promptly authorized North American to commence production of Merlin-powered Mustangs. Packard Motor Company in Detroit was already producing Merlin engines under license from Rolls-Royce. North American integrated Packard Merlins into the Mustang airframes, creating the P-51B model. Production began in mid-1943. By December of that year, the first Merlin Mustangs arrived in England. The 354th Fighter Group, flying P-51Bs, initiated escort missions over Germany in December 1943. Within weeks, it became evident that the Mustang had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. American bombers, which had been sustaining losses of 8 to 10% per mission, suddenly saw their losses plummet to 3 to 4%. German fighters, which had previously attacked bomber formations with impunity, now confronted long-range escorts capable of pursuing them all the way home. Luftwaffe pilots, who had commanded German airspace for 4 years, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. The P-51D model, introduced in mid-1944, was even more advanced. It featured a bubble canopy providing the pilot with 360-degree visibility, 6.50 caliber machine guns instead of 4, improved ammunition feed systems that reduced jamming, provisions for mounting rockets or bombs under the wings for ground attack missions, and additional internal fuel capacity that further extended its already impressive range. A P-51D with drop tanks could fly 1,700 miles, engage in combat for 30 minutes, and return to base with fuel to spare. No other single-engine fighter of World War II could match that endurance. The strategic impact was immense. Before the Mustang, American daylight bombing raids were restricted to targets within the range of shorter-legged escort fighters. This limited operations to targets in France, Belgium, and Western Germany. Berlin, the industrial heartlands of central Germany, and oil refineries in Poland remained beyond reach. German factories could be relocated eastward, safely beyond the range of American escorts, and continue producing aircraft and weapons. But with the arrival of the Mustang, no location in Germany was safe. Bombers could strike targets anywhere, and Mustangs would protect them. German industrial capacity, which had been dispersed to evade bombing, was suddenly vulnerable once more. Oil refineries, aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, chemical works, and transportation hubs, all were now within range of American bombers, shielded by Mustang escorts. In late 1943 and early 1944, the Allied bombing campaign against Germany was suffering catastrophic losses. Bombers were being shot down by the hundreds, crews were perishing, and the campaign was on the verge of suspension. Then, the Mustang arrived in large numbers. Suddenly, bombers had protection all the way to Berlin and back. Suddenly, German fighters could not attack bomber formations without confronting swarms of long-range American escorts. Suddenly, Luftwaffe pilots who took off to intercept bombers found themselves being hunted by Mustangs waiting above the formations. The air war had irrevocably shifted. In February 1944, General Jimmy Doolittle made a decision that revolutionized American fighter tactics. Doolittle had just assumed command of the 8th Air Force in England. Prior to his arrival, American fighters were mandated to remain close to bomber formations at all times. If enemy fighters attacked, American fighters would repel them and then return to their close escort positions. This defensive tactic protected bombers but allowed German fighters to escape and re-engage later. Doolittle changed the rules. He instructed his fighter pilots to aggressively pursue German fighters. If enemy aircraft were sighted, American fighters were to chase them wherever they went, shoot them down, and destroy them on the ground if possible. The objective was no longer merely to protect bombers, but to utterly annihilate the Luftwaffe. This tactical shift, combined with the Mustang's extended range and superior performance, proved devastating to German fighter forces. American pilots could now hunt German fighters across the entirety of Germany. If a Luftwaffe pilot took off to intercept bombers, Mustangs would chase him. If he attempted to land, Mustangs would follow him to his airfield and shoot him down during his landing approach. If he managed to land safely, Mustangs would strafe his aircraft on the ground. German pilots referred to this tactic as frei jagd, free hunting. American pilots called them fighter sweeps. Whatever the name, it was lethally effective. An example of this dominance occurred in January 1944. Major James Howard, flying a P-51B with the 356th Fighter Squadron of the 354th Fighter Group, was escorting B-17 bombers to a target near Oschersleben in Germany. Howard's squadron became separated from the bombers during the mission. Howard found himself alone, with 60 B-17s under attack by 30 German fighters. Instead of retreating, Howard launched a solo assault. For 30 minutes, he fought single-handedly against multiple German fighters. He shot down several aircraft, damaged others, and drove the rest away from the bombers. His guns jammed, but he continued making simulated attacks to keep German fighters away from the formation. Not a single bomber from that group was lost. Howard was awarded the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that decoration. His actions on January 11, 1944, demonstrated what a single Mustang pilot could achieve with skill and determination. But Howard's success wasn't merely individual heroism, it was made possible because he flew an aircraft that could remain with the bombers for hours, fight at high altitude, outmaneuver German fighters, and carry enough ammunition to engage multiple targets. No other fighter in early 1944 could have accomplished what Howard did that day. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was decisively losing the aerial battle. During Big Week, a concentrated bombing campaign in February 1944, Mustang pilots destroyed a significant percentage of Germany's experienced fighter pilots in air-to-air combat. These weren't just aircraft losses, these were trained, seasoned pilots killed or captured, pilots who could never be replaced. Germany was producing plenty of fighter aircraft. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s were rolling off production lines by the hundreds. But Germany could not train enough pilots fast enough to fill the cockpits. By late 1944, many German pilots had less than 100 hours of total flight time when they entered combat, some had as little as 50 hours. American pilots, in contrast, typically had over 200 hours of training before reaching Europe, and many veteran pilots had flown 50 or more combat missions. The experience gap was enormous. An inexperienced German pilot in a good aircraft could not defeat an experienced American pilot in an excellent aircraft. The result was predictable, German pilots died in huge numbers. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe early in the war reversed completely. By 1945, American pilots were achieving kill ratios of 5-to-1, 10-to-1, sometimes even higher, and the P-51 Mustang was responsible for more of those kills than any other Allied fighter. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was defeated, and the P-51 Mustang played a larger role in that defeat than any other Allied fighter. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was interrogated after Germany's surrender. American intelligence officers asked him when he realized Germany had lost the war. In a widely attributed quote, Göring's answer was direct: "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." That statement encapsulated the strategic impact of the P-51. When long-range American fighters could penetrate to the heart of Germany, when they could escort bombers anywhere and hunt German fighters everywhere, the Luftwaffe could no longer defend German airspace, and without control of the air, Germany could not win the war. What the Germans discovered when they tested Fraser's Mustang was not a hidden weakness they could exploit. It was the confirmation of what they already suspected: the P-51 was everything American pilots claimed it to be. It was fast, agile, possessed incredible range, could be flown aggressively without imperiling the pilot, was well armed, and the Americans had thousands of them. German engineers could study the laminar flow wing, the efficient cooling system, the Packard Merlin engine. They could measure its performance, calculate its drag coefficient, and analyze its control system. But they could not build enough aircraft to match American production. They could not train enough pilots to replace combat losses. They could not produce enough fuel to keep their remaining fighters in the air. By the time Lerche flew Fraser's Mustang, Germany had already lost the air war. The test flight at Rechlin merely confirmed what German command already knew: the Americans possessed a fighter that could go anywhere, do anything, and win the battle, and there was nothing the Luftwaffe could do to stop it. This is how technological superiority truly functions in war, not through propaganda claims or exaggerated performance numbers, but through engineering excellence that yields measurable results. The P-51 Mustang was not flawless, it had weaknesses. Its liquid-cooled engine was vulnerable to battle damage. The fuel system became unstable when the fuselage tank was full. The controls demanded careful handling at high speeds. But its combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and reliability made it the most effective long-range fighter of World War II. Even German test pilots who flew it reached that conclusion. Even German intelligence officers who analyzed it admitted its superiority. And when the war ended, the Mustang's record spoke for itself. It accounted for more enemy aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat than any other Allied fighter. Mustangs escorted bombers deep into Germany and brought them home safely. They dominated the skies over Europe in the final year of the war, not because American pilots were always better trained, though many were, not because American tactics were always superior, though they often were, but because they flew an aircraft that granted them every possible advantage. The Germans learned that lesson the hard way, by testing captured P-51s, by flying them in mock combat, by analyzing their performance in detail. And what they learned was that sometimes the other side builds something you cannot defeat. Something you can only respect. Something that changes the outcome of the war. The P-51 Mustang was that aircraft. And even its enemies knew it. The men who fought against America left the most honest record of its power. Battlescars brings you one of those stories every single day. If this one held you to the end, subscribe, tomorrow's story is already waiting. And your next one is right here.